When was the last time we witnessed a disaster that seriously disrupted the supply chain of more than 5 million companies worldwide? Looking back over the past few decades, I can't think of one. Recently, I have recorded several podcasts about the economic impact of this coronavirus outbreak, and what we have seen so far might just be the beginning. In addition to every week, a large part of the Chinese economy is sluggish. Things will get worse. Today, China accounts for about 20% of global GDP, but this does not tell the whole story. At this point, the rest of the world becomes so dependent on Chinese exports that any expanded closure for Chinese production would be a complete nightmare for global supply chains. In fact, a brand new study released by Dun and Bradstreet concluded that the coronavirus outbreak in China could affect more than 5 million jobs worldwide. It is difficult to deal with the economic disaster that has come to the world since the coronavirus has been hit. However, the figures are now coming regularly. I've been asked about this tragedy, and it's hard to say what can make a difference. If you look at more reconciling attitude like Brazil or Belarus, or an old-school hands-free approach to the virus, or the standard dignified lockdown of most of Europe, be very different from the economic impact because the world collectively protects their economies from pandemics, took the decision to sacrifice. No economy can be an island against the global economic crisis. A country that is miraculously immune to the virus will crash its economy due to the impact of the rest of the world that puts its economies in a protective coma. The only hope for the future is that once people are released, they can work like crazy to organize the global trade network. It is difficult to underestimate the creativity of people when it comes to emergency response, and perhaps more will be needed if system failure is to be avoided. A country like England and even more parts of Europe have complex and highly leveraged communities. They are economically and socially like racing cars. Their nature is different from less developed societies where the individual has much less security networks provided by their state. Large GDP rates are consumed by the social systems of the first world countries. It is true to say that some countries consume all private sector GDP as taxes and expenditures, and others borrow to do so to finance themselves. So when a country like the United Kingdom has a 20% drop in GDP, it looks bad, but it is worse. In generalities, public sector GDP will not have dropped at all. That 20% fall in almost solely from the private sector. When a large chunk of GDP comes from the public sector, anywhere from 20% to 40%, that means there is a multiplier effect that follows on from a private sector GDP drop, because the public sector GDP came from taxes from private sector GDP, so the pipeline of public spending money just got cut by a lot more than the 20% headline figure. So a 20% drop can mean a much greater drop of funding in countries where taxes 50%, sometimes more of GDP. The multiplier effect can be gauged by looking at the tax take of GDP by country. The UK's is quite reasonable at 34% tax to GDP, but France is close on 50%, and you can be forgiven for judging that the French take all private sector GDP in tax and spend it to conjure the other 50%. It's not quite that, but you see the chain of causality. This is where systematic state failure becomes a worry. If countries' economies do not spring back with lightning speed, budget deficits are going to be unsupportable. if millions of people are not occupied by the distractions of employment and left agitated by anger-spewing media, a collapse in social spending could be catastrophic. So we are right back with the obvious. Even with a collapse in tax revenue, the spending must continue. So we are back at the hyperinflation wiki. Hyperinflation is often associated with some stress to the government budget, such as wars or their aftermath, socio-political upheavals, a collapse in aggregate supply, or one in export prices, or other crises that make it difficult for the government to collect tax revenue. A sharp decrease in real tax revenue coupled with a strong need to maintain government spending, together with an inability or unwillingness to borrow, can lead a country into hyperinflation. Europe simply cannot exist for long as it is currently constructed, with its vast streams of taxation strangled off, and unless not only it, but also the rest of the world can reconnect and resurrect their economies at an incredible pace. If this does not happen, then the EU and globally country after country will be forced into restructuring. This restructuring will not be via austerity, that on such a huge scale will simply not be politically deliverable. It will only be possible by inflationary stimulus. It is, after all, the oldest political economic move in the playbook. To avoid this destiny, the miracle has to start now and has to be material before the autumn is over. If that happens, there will be pain, but it will be survivable. If it does not, then it will be the end of an era, and it will be a lucky and very old boomer that will see a resolution to a stability in the next epoch. The deadly virus has killed more than 470,000 and infected more than 9 million people around the world. Beyond pandemic-related downside risks, escalating tensions between the United States and China on multiple fronts, freight relationships among countries in the oil-producing cartel OPEC, and widespread social unrest have posed additional challenges to the global economy, the report said. Moreover, against a backdrop of low inflation and high debt, particularly in advanced economies, protracted, weak aggregate demand could lead to further disinflation and debt service difficulties that would weigh further on activity in turn, the report added. The International Monetary Fund struck a note of caution over the forecast, however, saying there was uncertainty over the length of the pandemic, the extent of the lockdowns, unemployment rates, and global supply chain reconfiguration, among other factors. Most of the idea, comment, information, and criticism containing in these videos have been created by Daily News Report. Before making any important investment decision, use the information contained in these videos as a starting point for conducting your own research. If you make any investment or legal decision, it is advised to consult an expert before making this decision.